Curiosity killed the cat.
I had a lot of fun watching Archive 81, a horror mystery thriller series which premiered on Netflix earlier this year. I believe the main reason I did, besides the great art direction and creepy aesthetic, was because I, like many others, was invested in solving the mystery behind the main storyline. Archive 81 is based on a podcast of the same name, with the show having an emphasis on the analog found footage style using video cassettes, as opposed to its audio-only podcast original. Even while watching the show, I couldn't help but ask, why are we so attracted to these kinds of stories? Why do stories steeped with mystery capture our attention and have us racking our brains, trying to answer the questions they have set up for the main characters to solve? Why can plot twists make or break a story? I will be talking about Archive 81 and how it works so well as a good mystery for us to interact with, as well as some examples of good and bad plot twists, and why as humans we love a good puzzle, even if our curiosity sometimes can get the better of us. For now, I will only be spoiling the first episode of Archive 81, so I can describe some of the secrets that are mentioned early on and what we are meant to uncover throughout the rest of the season. That way, before I get to the end of the video, you can decide whether or not you want to watch the show. Near the end of my deep dive, I'll have to talk about one major spoiler so I can explain why the show's twist works so well, but I'll be sure to warn you before I do that. In Archive 81, we are thrown into the life of archivist and tape restorer Dan Turner, who is hired by mysterious and wealthy businessman Virgil Davenport to restore a collection of tapes found at the Visser apartments. The tapes were found after the apartments burned down in 1994, snuffed out along with its residents perishing in the fire. These tapes were recorded by Melody Pendress, a student filmmaker investigating her biological mother's disappearance, and eventually, a cult seemingly centered around the apartments. As the audience, we were asking questions. What did these tapes mean to Davenport? Why did he seek out Dan to do the restoration? Davenport knows about the tragedy that killed Dan's family when he was young, so it's certainly not a coincidence that he picked him. Dan and the audience are unaware of the exact details of Davenport's company. We don't know how he became so ridiculously wealthy, so we can assume there might be some shady business going on as well. While restoring the tapes, Davenport requires Dan to stay in an old compound owned by his company and secluded in northern New York. He explains this is needed because the damaged tapes are too fragile to move from the compound. But we know that's not true, and the lack of internet availability and phone signal means that he's worried more about the secrecy of this project and keeping Dan isolated. As Dan goes through the tapes, he learns about Melody and her investigation. There are many strange things happening at the apartments, with some supernatural elements sprinkled around as well. Unusual symbols are carved on the outside of the building, resembling something from the occult. There are bizarre noises coming from the vents that sound like ritualistic chanting. The 6th floor is off limits. Dan even sees a demonic figure in the static of the first tape, suggesting that something supernatural could be involved. In addition, at the end of the first tape, Melody pleads for someone to find her and her friend Jess. And that's when Dan sees that his father was possibly involved with Melody's disappearance or death. This first episode perfectly sets up the season, hooking us with the introduction of all these mysterious elements. Our minds are bombarded with questions. What is Davenport's and Dan's father relation to Melody and the Visser apartments? They explain that no bodies were found after the fire, so what does that mean for the residents and Melody, who supposedly died there? Since there are occult references at the apartments, is there a cult? And if so, who is part of it? What do they believe in? And are they dangerous? Throughout the season, more layers to the puzzle of the story are added. Subtle details and hints become important later on, and help to induce a sense of fear and dread, keeping us interested. Now that we've covered a bit of the mystery driving the show, I'd like to talk about why as humans we are so intrigued by mysteries in the first place. Some movies and TV shows are more shallow in terms of story, and we can tell ourselves to turn off our brains for the sake of allowing us to enjoy the experience. But many of them put thought into their plot in order to engage the audience on an intellectual level, and the most complex of these plots are filled with twists and turns and layers of details that add to the narrative. We are given enough information at the beginning of the tale to know that we are still missing some in order to connect the dots. These are mysteries, something that is difficult to understand if we are not given all the information possible. Humans are curious by nature. When we see a car accident, it's not uncommon for us to look at it when passing. We want to know how bad the accident is. Are the drivers okay? Are the cars totaled? As humans, we are drawn to knowledge, so the lack thereof, in the case of a mystery, draws us in since we are innately curious creatures. We are consistently seeking out information, as it is the reward for our curiosity. There have been experiments testing this phenomenon, one being in the article, The Pandora Effect, The Power and Peril of Curiosity. In this experiment, participants were left in a room with some pens while they waited for what they thought was the real study. They were told that these were leftover pens from an unrelated experiment, and that some of them delivered a small electric shock when pressed. Some participants had pens that were labeled according to whether they would shock you. Others had no clue. Researchers found that the people that had no idea which pens would shock them actually tested more pens than the other group. This shows that even if a negative consequence, like physical harm, is a result, people are too curious for their own good. Their curiosity and need for information outweighed the possible negative results. While watching a good mystery movie or show, we feel a sense of accomplishment when we discover our theories are correct. The audience has to interpret the clues they are given throughout the story, with some being more obvious than others. Even if we can't figure out the mystery, there is still a thrill when we are surprised with whatever the twist happens to be. Granted, it is a well-earned twist that still makes sense in the grand scheme of the rest of the story. By the end of Season 1, many of our initial questions have been answered. We know what happened to Melody, what Davenport's connection was to the Visser apartments, and why Dan is so important in the story. Many of these answers were revealed as twists and hinted at throughout the season. But do these twists feel earned? As in, are these answers satisfactory to the audience watching, with us either being shocked by a surprising explanation, or with something that confirms our previous suspicion? A good twist can change our understanding of everything that preceded it, giving us the aha moment when we realize there were clues throughout the story all along. It utilizes the plot's elements and subverts them. An effective twist recontextualizes what's come before. One of the most famous plot twists in movie history, especially horror movies, is from The Sixth Sense. Spoiler alert, even though I hope you've all seen this movie since it's a horror classic. But the twist is that the protagonist, child psychologist Malcolm Crowe, who we've followed throughout the entire movie, has actually been dead for most of it, having been killed by a former patient in the very first scene of the film. Now, this makes complete sense in the grand scheme of the movie, since we are given hints throughout. We find out the child he is treating can see dead people.
I see dead people.
And that the dead people only see what they want to see. This twist makes us think back at all the hints we had through the film, even though they were certainly not obvious at the time. Once the main character's death is revealed to the audience, it is effectively shocking, but also not unbelievable in the context of the main story, and makes a second viewing all the more interesting. There are some movies and TV shows that fail to fulfill the expectation of a satisfying twist. Twists sometimes can feel like they're only there to shock us, even if it doesn't make sense with the rest of the story. Other times, the twist is so obvious that the viewer can predict it easily. In contrast with The Sixth Sense, a horror movie many would argue has one of the worst endings is The Happening. Now, there are many things wrong with this movie. Not to say that I don't enjoy watching it for fun, but the twist, or explanation around the central conflict in the movie, is extremely underwhelming and delivered poorly. Not a spoiler warning for the ending of The Happening, which I also hope any horror fans out there have watched, because it's still a fun, R-rated B movie. Plot summarized very quickly, people are ending their own lives because of some poison in the air. The source of the toxins is never truly confirmed, even though it is referred to at the beginning of the movie to be just an act of nature, and that the plants are what's causing the happening. It is underwhelming, partly because the quote-unquote twist is basically revealed very early on, and because the movie still makes us feel like there's something left to uncover, but there isn't. There's not a full explanation as to why the plants decided to do this now, even though, again, it can be assumed to be some sort of revenge against humans because of global warming and pollution. But then, how do the plants know to attack when there is a large number of people around? And then when that stops working, how do they know to start targeting individuals in the second half of the film? Why do the plants stop when they do at the end of the movie?
Man, science will come up with some reason to put in the books, but in the end it'll be just a theory.
Mysterious, open-ended conclusions to movies can work sometimes, but this one feels painfully anticlimactic and disappointing. The threat is at the same time too convenient and ambiguous, and nothing is really resolved by the end of the movie. Now, with everything we've talked about, why does Archive 81 work so well as an effective mystery series? Well, Archive 81 fulfills the requirements of having a well-constructed, complex, and puzzling story, with a multitude of satisfying twists and a shocking Season 1 conclusion that keeps us hungry for more. By the end of Episode 8, we have had many questions answered, but some still left unresolved, presumably left to be explained sometime in the future. There is a reason this show was in the top 10 of the Netflix trending TV charts, basically as soon as it was released, and for a few days peaked at number 1. It can be assumed that by word of mouth and overall great reviews, along with its intriguing premise, the show caught on in a big way. Its twists, and there are quite a few of them, are earned as they are developed throughout Season 1 without being too obvious to the viewer. And once learned, the new information we are given recontextualizes everything we have experienced. The dots have been connected, and our expectations subverted. It is also the way the secrets are revealed to us that works so well. We are uncovering the mystery at the same time as Dan. We are witnessing his reaction when he figures out the connection between the latest hints, just as we are. He's not an oblivious main character that makes stupid decisions, like in some horror narratives. He is smart and works along with his friend Mark in order to figure out the mystery themselves. Dan's connection to Melody and the involvement of his father also brings an emotional element to the show. We are emotionally invested in this story as we learn more about the residents of the Visser, Dan's father, and watch Dan grow more and more attached to Melody. The reveal of the show's mysteries are meaningful to us because it means we will know what happened to Melody, who we spent the entirety of Season 1 trying to find. So I didn't want to go through all this without dissecting one specific twist from Archive 81 and how it was effective. So I will be spoiling one big secret. Go to this timestamp to skip the spoiler and get to my final thoughts. Also, please bear with me as I try to condense this plot point as concisely as I can. The mystery and twist that stood out to me the entire season was the mystery of Melody's mother. In fact, the mystery of her mother's identity is subverted twice. It is first thought that the main mystery is finding out who Melody's mother is and why she was at the Visser when she sent Melody the letter. Later, we are given subtle hints that her mother was never at the Visser, but then the question would be, who sent her the letter in the first place? It was unclear why someone would target her specifically. Once it is revealed that her mother was never there, we learn that Samuel, the main cultist at the Visser, was the one who wrote the letter. And why did Samuel contact Melody? Well, we were previously given more hints when Dan's father, her psychologist, explains to Melody that he talked about her possible psychic ability to another man, who we now know was indeed Samuel. From there, he figured out that Melody was a witch, and used the fact that Melody didn't know who her mother was to lure her to the apartment. When she finds this out, she is devastated. But it still makes sense to us in the grand scheme of things. If Melody's mother was never there, it makes sense that someone else reached out, and now that we know she's a witch, it makes sense as to why. With Melody having these powers, it even makes sense as to how she's communicating with Dan in the present. Then, the second twist is when the compound keeper is revealed to be Melody's real mother, working for Davenport as a way to search for her missing daughter. This brings everything full circle, as she explains she gave Melody up as a baby to keep her away from the burden of being a witch. This reveal also acts as a necessity to the story, because to find Melody in the finale, they needed another witch to perform the ritual. These twists were built dramatically throughout the show and are satisfying in context of the full story. They are important to the plot and also recontextualize everything we have seen up to this point. Archive 81 has thrown us for a loop. The emotional way secrets are revealed, the complexity in how the twists fit perfectly into the story, and the amount of mystery still left for us to uncover in a potential Season 2 successfully makes for a thrilling and interesting horror mystery experience. The twists and turns kept me enthralled through all 8 episodes. The well-crafted script has efficiently built up this increasingly cryptic and complex world that will be exciting to dive into in the future. The lingering questions will have us contemplating fan theories until Season 2 eventually proves them right or wrong. The finale, and especially the final scene, have opened up a whole new can of worms and introduced a new plot device that could put everything we have seen thus far in a brand new light. We have new mysteries waiting to be solved. Hopefully, if and when Season 2 comes out, we are gifted with the same amount of depth and mystery this season has given us. As I've explained, a good mystery done right will certainly have us coming back for more.